Hey, and welcome to the Rich Martin podcast. So good that you're with me today, and I love doing these. These are all about trying to help build local church in Europe. And today I get to speak to Gavin Calver, and Gavin is an amazing guy who leads the Evangelical Alliance here in the UK and has had a whole host of other things. And I wanted to get Gavin on to talk to him about everything from unity to, we talk about micro church, we talk about raising a family when you're in ministry, and Gavin's got some brilliant insights. I love chatting to him. I think you're going to love what's coming up. So let's jump straight into this great podcast with Gavin Calver. Thanks so much for being with us, Gavin. And if you could just give us a little bit of a rundown of your world. I've just said this is who you are, but could you just give us a bit of a journey? How have you ended up being the Evangelical Alliance CEO, leader of that whole amazing organization?
Yeah, I'm from the Christian Mafia, right? I'm the seventh generation called Mr., called Reverend, not Mr. And so my dad actually used to run the EA when I was young. My granddad ran it before, not that it's a family business. And so it's probably the last thing on earth I wanted to do.
Right.
But my heart is I want to unite the church to reach the lost. And so I ended up at Youth for Christ, straight from Bible college or seminary, if you're American, and ended up at Youth for Christ for 14 years, reaching young people. That was really fun, really exciting, went really well, loved it, absolutely loved it. Even non-Christians like Youth for Christ,
Right.
because they might not like the ministry, but you're helping naughty kids not be naughty in their life. So, it was that was a lot of fun, but it became clear after 14 years there that I was a bit comfortable. Number of prophetic words. And I remember my wife specifically saying to me, "You're too safe, you're too comfortable, and you're too popular." And God didn't make it to be any of those things. And you start to feel unsettled. And the Lord made it fairly clear I was to go to the EA, not to lead it at that point, but to oversee mission and evangelism. Because this evangelical word gets totally misunderstood. It's all about the evangel. It's all about the gospel. It's about good news. And so I went to EA overseeing all the gospel work, which was brilliant because, again, it's the fun bit. But then 2 years ago, the role of leading the EA came up. The Lord was fairly clear with me. I've stepped into it, and it's great. It's a great privilege, but it's also a massive challenge. So I've kind of got here because I want to reach the lost, and I want people to do it together.
Right. So let's tuck into that. Do it together. Unity. Give us. Yeah. I mean, everyone has a different take on unity. Everyone has not everyone, but there's lots of different versions of what unity is. Where's your heart lie with it? Because there is a mixed bag of, even in the evangelical world, there's a mixed bag of what churches could look like, and everything from competitive leaders through to different doctrine through to, methodologies. Like what does unity look like, in 2021, or what is it something we're working towards? Is it something you're trying to create, or what does that look like for you guys?
Well, you can't create it. Only God can create unity, really, in the end. But it is what Jesus prays for so passionately in John 17. So I think in my world, there's two types of unity I'm interested in. There's the unity of the evangelical church, which is my primary purpose and mandate. Then there is the wider unity of the church. But they are sister things, but they're not quite entirely the same as well. So It's important that we're in unity beyond the evangelicals. But it's really important that as an Evangelical Alliance, we're uniting evangelicals to try and make an impact. Now, so the unity that I do in my day job, a lot of that's around gospel evangelism. It's around standing together. It's around not compromising on the word of God. But we also have to realize as well that Christianity is wider than evangelicalism. So I have a role, a mandate, a calling to unite evangelicals to reach the lost. But then I'm also part of a global family as well that goes beyond that. So there's both with the unity are important. And the reason I love the evangelical unity so much is it's got real legs.
Go on.
I'm a good evangelical and not a real activist. I don't just want to sort of sit in a room and sing banners together. I want to go out and make a difference in the world. I want the world to look more like a kingdom. I want to go after the lost alongside others. But I also think there's a beauty in unity in celebrating difference. So one of the great privileges I have is I preach a lot of different churches. Now that is it's a different feast every time. It's absolutely remarkable. But each is a church loving the Lord, loving its community, wanting to reach its community. I never have a home match, if I put it in those terms. Because everyone else thinks their church is normal, and to me, it's not. Right. And then also, the church can do something the world can't do. Come on. I remember in my local church a few years ago going for a curry night, a men's curry night. There's 22 men there. aged probably 16 to 80 odd. Because of where I live in London, of the 22 men, there's 15 ethnicities. Now, the guy running the curry house, who I know quite well because it's local, says to me, "What the heck are you lot?" I said, "Well, what do you think we are?" He said, "Well, I think you're the church." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you're a vicar type." I said, "Okay." I said, "Why else would we be the church?" He said, "No one else in this community can get this broad and diverse a group of people eating a meal around a table together. There's something about the church that goes over the boundaries that other people create."
Yeah. And do you think in your time of Spring Harvest, the whole works, do you think that we are more united? Do you think that when you look across Europe and beyond, or let's to keep it into Europe or in the UK, like, do you think we're more united, or do you think we're more divided?
Both, which is a strange thing to say. I think the senior leadership of the nation are more united. I think at a local level, we can be more competitive than ever. So I do think that there's a great unity in leadership, but I'm not sure that always filters down to the local on the ground. I also think that in the UK, we have a privilege they don't have in, say, the USA. In the USA, you can afford to be separate because, frankly, you've got enough Christendom left. We here, it's not like there's been an epiphany from heaven that's told us to be united. It's that actually we've got to be pragmatic. There's not that many of us left. So if we don't like each other, that's further divide, further problem, further challenge. So I think there is a greater unity overall, but I think competition is rife. And that's the thing we need to speak out against, really. So, for example, we're using Youth for Christ. To do a youth mission, all the churches might pay, do it together, everything else. But the sticking point is if kids come to faith, which church do they go to?
Right.
So until we can start saying it's about God and his kingdom, not me and my church, the unity that Jesus longs for may not be fully possible.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if you'd agree, but I think maybe some of that's a generational thing. So I think the generation, maybe your kids or the young people that are in youth ministries that are coming through, they're not, even millennials, they're not really stuck on brands that they are like obsessed with. You know, in our parents' generation, it was like, you know, they would buy Persil washing powder because it was all over the adverts and they would stick with it. And that kind of flowed through to church, right? This is it. And they would be demanding of a kind of brand or a style. Whereas the generation that are coming through, they're so much more flexible. They've got this ease and breeze where they're not, of course they like brands, I'm not denying that, but they have this way of understanding that things don't work in just 1 + 1 = 2. There's this space that is blurry, and they can merge and they can flow and they can move from different things very freely because of the world that they've grown up in. And I think as that starts to emerge, my hope would be is that competitive side, as the generations hand the churches on and transition churches over to them, that a lot of that competitive side goes, because it's just not how they're wired. They're not wired in that way. I don't know if you'd agree on what I've just said.
Yeah, and I think various things are dying that contribute to that as well. So denominationalism's dying. You know, I'm an ordained Baptist minister, but I'd go to any type of church, to be honest. It's more about what the church believes than the stream it's in.
Right.
I think also within that as well, nominalism's dying.
Right.
So, and goodness me, the pandemic has been the final sort of nail in that coffin, which isn't a bad thing necessarily. So suddenly then you end up with people that are probably more on fire on a Sunday. I think younger generations are drawn to passion more than they're drawn to always doctrine. Now, both matter.
Totally, yeah.
And I think what you're going to end up with is people in churches together who are hungry for the same things.
Yeah, great.
Not necessarily who've just agreed everything.
Yeah.
And so I do think things are changing. The thing about churches, it's got to keep changing. Now, the substance should never change. Don't mess around with the word of God. Stop changing the Bible to fit your culture. Change your culture with the truth and the word of God. The substance of the message doesn't change, but the style should change like the wind. It's one of the reasons why I really believe now that the style of church changes. It's pre-pandemic, church in the UK was a set menu.
Right.
It's nearly always 10:30 and 6:30.
Yeah.
That's got nothing to do with Jesus, by the way. Everything's to do with milking cows. Used to milk cows at 9, milk them at 5. Took half hour to get the milk, half hour to get clean, half hour to get to church. Nothing to do with Jesus. And then most churches would say, oh, we're really different, or we're not a normal church. But in the end, most of us sang for 20 minutes, had a few notices and prayers, had a talk for half an hour, sang a couple more songs, went home. after some bad coffee, right? I think going forward, we're looking at a buffet for church.
Come on.
Because people have started coming to your church in their pajamas. Well, don't turn that tap off now. People are looking at different times, different ways, different levels in community, but the substance doesn't change. We confuse substance and style. So for too long, we make style sacred. Style is not sacred.
Come on, yeah.
Why I can go anywhere on a Sunday to preach, and it is church. The fact they're doing stuff I don't know how to do it, the fact that they say certain things when they do communion, or they all stand at a certain point, and I don't really know what I'm doing, doesn't matter. That's style. It's the substance that matters. And I think for too long, we have fought over style, when frankly, the evangelist in me says, whatever style gets the message to people, let's do it. Because we can't keep celebrating historical figures like James Hudson Taylor. Went to China, wore the dress, spoke the language, ate the food, and in order to reach people. We can't celebrate that and do the opposite here.
Come on. So talk to me then about, you touched on it, evangelicalism. You said it's a misinterpreted word, or a word that has been bandied around. I think with the news streams that we all get that are highly integrated with what's going on over in America, you know, we open up our news and there's so much of America's news in our news now, and I get it. There's lots that's related. And then to see the presidential elections, to see all the stuff that goes on over there, to then hear the word evangelical and to put it to Evangelical Alliance. I don't know. I think a lot of people would have a different view of what evangelical is. What is the good of it? What do we need to fight for? What needs to just drop off? How do we move forward with that word?
Yeah. I think we firstly have to admit that it needs redeeming. You know, it's not redundant, but it needs redeeming. But also, let's not just pick a mix of what we take from America. So if you're gonna lay into evangelicalism because of what there is in America, let's do that with some other things too. It can't just be the evangelical bit we get uptight about. Right. You know, our two cultures are so different. It's untrue. Now, if I was in America, would I call myself evangelical? Oh, well, I'd have to answer that because I live there. But I certainly wouldn't be as comfortable as I am with it here.
Okay.
And I think we need to say what it is. I mean, four elements that are unmissable. The Bible bit I've talked about. So don't change scripture. Hold firmly to Bible. People say to me, why don't you have an open mind on X or Y? I have an open Bible. I'm an evangelical Christian. Secondly, the death and resurrection of Jesus being the most central thing to what we stand for. Thirdly, the need for conversion. So many people seem to think you come to faith by osmosis, or there's a growing universalism in the UK. Everyone's going to heaven anyway. Evangelicals believe in conversion. You get on your knees and you meet Savior. But then finally, the need to be active in the world, making the world more like the kingdom. That's why evangelicals led the abolition of the slave trade, provided education before others. In the last 30 years, have come up with and delivered food banks, Christians Against Poverty, street pastors. So that's what an evangelical is. Now, that means quite a lot of room. Now, the EA has a statement of faith. People gather around. It's largely been unchanged in our 175-year history. And the Evangelical Alliance itself is grounded in two things: united action and holistic mission. So we want to go together and we want to make a difference in the nation. When you start saying these things, it makes sense to people. Now, you, Rich, don't need to walk around telling everyone you're an evangelical Christian. You don't need the Evangelical Alliance. I do. So I need that language. Yeah. But when I say to people and we show people what it is, they're like, no, I'm one of them. That's okay. Yeah. And all we've got to do is one step by one step, just make it clear what it is and get confidence in that again. At the same time, too many Christians in this country have baptized their culture and want everyone to love them. I think that show is over. You can't want Iranian results. You know, we go on about Iran being the fastest church in the world. You can't want Iranian results in Western comfort. If you really want a move of God, you're going to have to accept there's going to be times where you will be slightly alienated and marginalized. But if you really want to be a social leper, try being me with the upcoming Christmas parties. What do you do for a living? I lead the Evangelical Alliance. That's fun. but at the same time, take the media who lay into it the most. Yeah. The media don't know the difference between evangelism and evangelicalism. So in one sense, we've got a wider bit of re-education to do. But at the same time as well, I'm just confident in the fact I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a good news person. Crack on.
Yeah, amazing. And so this book you've written with your wife, Anne, I'm guessing you did it pre-lockdown, but launched it during lockdown because it got launched in 2020. Was this something you wrote before?
Yeah, it's accidentally prophetic. It really is.
I like
So
that kind of prophetic sounds good.
yeah. We wrote a book. It was when I was leading Spring Harvest, which I don't do anymore, simply because you can't ride two horses. I need to focus on the aim.
Yeah.
But it was going to be the sort of material for Spring Harvest. And we just felt from God, me and Anne particularly, this unleashed stuff was so important. What does it mean to be the Acts Church today? But we wrote things in there like your street is your parish, your garden fence is your pulpit. We all need to take ownership of sharing our faith and getting closer in community, stuff that you didn't know what was coming.
Right.
And so it really does speak into this time, but it also talks about how do we just go back to the simplest form of church, which is closer to people, in deeper community, sharing possessions, loving the least, the last, and the lost. It's had a profound impact on our life as well, because my wife, Anne, was a Baptist minister. She's now left she was associate minister at a church. She's left that, started a charity called Unleashed Church that's planting home churches. So we're doing it as well, because you can't write it and not do it. So I love the church in all its manifestations, but my current church is an Unleashed Church in Northwest London, which when it gets to 25 people, we'll have to plant again, because then it's too big for us to all love each other. We're currently at about 20. And it's a great fun adventure trying to live out what this actually looks like.
Oh, well, let me go there. How does it work? How in your Unleashed Church, let's go there with your church, how have you got yourself around kind of 1 Timothy teaching of what an elder is, what an overseer is, what a deacon is, right ways to worship that Paul talks about, because it's a mini passion of mine over the last 2 or 3 months that I've been chatting through with friends of have we got so obsessed with the structure that Paul dictated or wrote about, didn't dictate, but like explained, that we've tried to form everything around that, whereas it seems like yourself and Anne have broke free. And how does all that work?
Yeah, each home, because it's not weird. It's not just one. There's a few of these planting over the UK, and there's even a couple overseas. It's exciting. It's happening very naturally. But each church has a couple of people, not necessarily a couple. Let's get that clear, but a couple of people leading that home church. Anne is the overseer of the sort of Unleashed movement, if we want to call it that. It's a bit grand. But so Anne is the sort of spiritual accountability. And then Anne is part of a team of the church called All Nations in the Midlands with Steve Uppal, which comes under the sort of apostolic covering of there. So Anne's not just rogue.
Yeah.
But the structures are very different. We are going much more for everyone gets to play. So I mentioned Steve Uppal. When we were doing it online before we could do it in person, he preached one Sunday. The next Sunday, my 11-year-old son preached, because everyone gets to play. There's nothing in the Bible about ages. We say you can't do that to 16. There's nothing about that. It's about spiritual maturity. And so what we've got going on is it's early church. It's unschooled, ordinary folk. There is leadership. There is accountability within that. But the church just rolls differently too. We've had to unlearn what we'd learned before. So
give us some examples.
Well, if there's an average Sunday at Unleashed, it would be like this. And then there isn't really an average, but this is how it rolls. You go around to a home at 1. Whoever's turn it is to bring the food, because just because you host it doesn't mean you always bring the food. We like to rotate that. Whoever's turn it is to bring the food, happy days. We eat together, fellowship together for a couple of hours. And it's not just eating and getting on to the main stuff. It's actually, how's your week been? What's going on? What's happening? Then there's about an hour of random fun. It's often a game of footy in the garden or something, because there's kids and things going on. Then that rolls quite naturally into church, if you want to call it that other bit, although we think the whole thing's church, where you end up worshiping, praying. Someone brings a thought. It's not certain quite.
Let me pause you there. You just whipped through worship and praying. Well, what do you gather? Does everyone jump in the living room? Someone pull a guitar out? Do you put something on the TV? What was it like?
No. Someone pulls guitar out, gather in the living room, and you worship. Now, what's interesting, it is the most unseeker-friendly you could imagine. About a quarter of our church aren't Christian, and they love it because they've already done. Because if you think about this, the entry point normally is going through the front door of a building you're not familiar with. The entry point here is coming into a home you're familiar with. You've eaten for a couple of hours. We've laughed together. We've done some nonsense. All this is happening. And then it just rolls into church. We've not had anyone not want to go to the service bit, if that is what you call that, but it's much less formal. So we would worship together maybe for 20, 25 minutes. Then there'd be times of prayer. People share a few things. They might say specific. Someone would bring a word of sorts. And then there'd be, is there anything going on we really need to be praying into? I know everything going on in those people's lives. That's the difference. I've never had that in church.
Wow.
So,
and you're not the big cheese, to put the phrase on that. You're not the it could
I'm
be
nothing. I'm nothing. I go to the church.
And what about, let's get practical. What about giving? What about like the thought of, what do you all put money in a pot like they would, like we read about in the book of Acts, and decide what you do with it? Or do you encourage that? How does all that work?
I think if Anne had her way, there'd be no charity status. The money would just pass between hands like the Acts Church and everything else. I've kind of talked her into the fact that as long as you're allowed to in this country, why on earth would you not get the extra 25% from the government and everything else? So giving happens through the usual ways, really. But I'll tell you the difference, Rich, and I won't give specifics. It makes me look good or bad. Difference is you end up paying for stuff for other people that you would never know about. Whether that's a kid's school uniform or a gas bill, because you're so close to people. So if I've got savings and you go to our church and you're struggling to pay your gas bill, I need to pay your gas bill. That's the kind of culture we're developing, because that's what it was like, because that's family.
And what about, so I mean, you don't mind me sticking around this? We're off piste, but I love being off piste there. What about your kids? Because, like, let me give you an example, right? I go to a church, there's about 800-900 people in one of the services. The kids' work is like, it's all scannable in, it's all CRB checked, it's all, everyone's, they get this great material, they come out loving it, sweets to galore and little things they've made. Then you work up the categories, and then the youth have got basketball courts, we've got a little skate park in the church I go to. It's just a really rich, deep experience for these kids to be in this safe environment, learning about God, making a ton of great friends. I always think when I hear about these types of churches like you're doing, it's kind of like, like that. Is that not a pinch point? Like, adults love it because suddenly, we can do things differently. Where does that land?
If I'm honest, Rich, I had exactly the same concerns as you going into this. But a year or so in, all I would say is my children have never been more on fire for Jesus than they are right now. I have got philosophical questions about 14 years in youth ministry, where it was always get them out, get them into the group, get them. But it might not last. That's the other thing. We do know that with our kids, we want to get them to 25 loving Jesus. We're never finished, Yeah. But my 14 and 11-year-old actively giving prophetic words to 45-year-olds. They're fully contributing to church life. The reason there's the fun bit is that's done for the kids as well. Why are we playing? What you got a couple of middle-aged men in there who've not played football for 20 years who started playing football again because they want to. So it's the relationships go deeper. It's really interesting. At the same time, to be honest, I know the value of affiliated faith for young people. So there is a large Anglican church local to us where our kids go along some of the youth ministry, because actually I think that's wise. So they go along to some of the youth ministry there. But my children at this moment would not change church in 100 years because they love what's happening, and you've got things like. My son was a bit upset the other day. So a young couple in their 20s, bearing in mind me and Anna are in our 40s. So this is how it's working. Young couple in our 20s were around at our house for dinner because you got in and out of homes. And they realized he was upset. So they said to us later, would you mind if we surprised him by picking him up from school tomorrow, taking him for a milkshake and doing X, Y, and Z. Blah, blah, blah. It's that kind of community going on. So the significant adult presence is not an hour and a half a week in a session. It's actually sharing life as well. Right. What that will do for my teenage kids is amazing. And here's the thing. This pandemic season has shown me once more, we cannot expect a youth worker to do in an hour a week what we have done in 15 years.
Yeah.
So where discipleship of our children comes from, like the fact that half of kids from Christian homes don't make it in faith, we've got to start dealing with this. And all I'd say again is it's the buffet thing. So Rich, what your kids have got going on sounds amazing. Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But also, what my kids have got going on is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And different stages, different things. But one thing I do know, we were chatting to some friends of ours recently who are concerned about their 4 kids because they just don't know where their 4 kids are at with Jesus. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And they said, we don't really know because they get to an age they don't really talk to us. And they go out to their groups and things, and we just hope they're doing okay. And they said to us, do you know where your kids are at with Jesus? And we had to play it down because you don't want to be sort of, because of course we know. Yeah. And so it is interesting.
I just wanted to take a quick pause from this great podcast to tell you about our partner, Compassion. and I caught up with a church leader called Claire, who knows firsthand all about compassion. I'm here with Claire Hooper, a friend who had the privilege of going out to a compassion project a couple of years ago in Uganda. Claire, what was that like, and what's your thoughts on partnering with compassion?
When we first went, Rich, I think, like everybody, you never can be fully prepared for what you see. And I kind of knew that. I'd sort of thought my way through what I'm going to see when I see poverty. And you see things that people shouldn't have to live through. You see things that no eye should have to see. Like, it's devastating to see people living the way that they're living. And I think what I wasn't expecting was that when we arrived at the Uganda Compassion headquarters, just how structured, how well thought through, how well managed, how well organized it was. And that was the thing that really clinched it for me about wanting to partner with them, is that you've got a group of people, we're church leaders, we've got a church, and we're trying to encourage them to get behind something. You want to make sure that when people are giving their money or their time or their prayers, that something good's going to be done with that. And so it really reassured me, I suppose, going into those offices. In fact, I was challenged by how incredibly well run and well thought through the projects were, the education was, the level of detail that each of the people that were trained were, the compassion they had, the power they had to change things because of the way that it was structured. So that was my biggest takeaway from being in the Uganda headquarters. We met some amazing people. We went to some projects where people are doing amazing things, doing good. But compassion for me then changed. I changed my perspective towards them as just being do-gooders, as to being change makers, really, people who were impacting the world. It's only been going 60 years, and what they've done and achieved, 2.1 million children, I think. Wow. Now they are sponsoring. In 60 years, it made me think, what could we all do in 60 years? So that's why we partnered with them. And yes, to sponsor children and to get children out of poverty, essential work that the Christian church should be doing, but also to partner with an organisation doing what they do. Why wouldn't you want to do that? They're amazing.
So there you have it, first-hand amazing work of compassion from Claire. If you want to know more about this great work, just go to the Compassion website, which is compassionuk.org, and you can find out all about it there. I'm really grateful for their support, and I'm even more grateful for the great work that they do all over the world. Well, let's jump straight back into this great conversation. Gav, this is fascinating because of what I've been thinking through the last couple of months. And sorry, I've also been using your phrase, which I'm really, really, really happy to hear someone else use it, which is people are saying, what do you think the future of the church is? And I've been saying, I think it's a buffet. I don't think, I don't think there's one magic lever or big red button that's going to do it all. I think it's like, we're going to have buffet, but we've not been able to have a buffet before because we've had a lack of good leadership throughout. And so all the good leaders have tend to go and build a similar style or method, right? And methods that we've talked about. When you're talking now, it's like, oh wow, we're sat in front of like two generals of the faith. I know you're not as old as your mum and dad, but you're walking in towards general, you're doing great things, and you've decided to go and take all of that knowledge, all of that passion, and to do a different thing on the buffet table called small church, and to do it well. And that was what I've been saying to people, is like, wouldn't it be great if the buffet table was, you have real great leaders across the breadth of this spectrum of doing church. And you've got people who are doing mega church, because I love mega church. I've done it for a number of years now. I think it's amazing. And then you've got other people like yourselves who are doing what they're calling micro church. And it's these leaders who, you spoke in front of thousands, you know what that looks like, you know how that works, you know what that kind of scenario is. And now you're taking all of that and you're developing, and the buffet of it. My question would be, going deeper on it, would be, is it not just you're building a lovely club? And it's me being cynical, right? And because I've never done it, but is it not you're just building a lovely club for you and your friends? How does it open up to, what's great about being in church is there is the guy who's homeless, or there is the couple that are slightly unusual because they wear funny hats or whatever it might be. And then there is, and the idea of maybe going small, is it just birds of a feather flock together, and you're just going to gather the kind of nice people that you all get on with. When it gets to 25, start again with some more nice people. How have you worked that dynamic out? Because that's brilliant about a church of 100, 200 type thing, is you've just got all of this, cacophony of different voices and type things. How does that look for you?
Yeah, Because it's missional, it's about who you meet and inviting them in. So we would have a consistent 20, but of that, 15 would be the same. Some people would come in as a one-off. I think I don't want to sound judgmental on any other format, you see, but if you, as an evangelist, if you looked at the percentage of non-Christians in our little churches, it's not just here, they're over the country. The percentage of non-Christians in these small churches is far higher than it is in our large churches. Because how many non-Christians are in on Sunday morning in a mega church? It'll be a lot, but it won't be a lot of 1,000. You know, it won't be anywhere near 25% of the 1,000. Won't be. You know, so actually genuine relationships when they're missional opens that up wider. I think also, I won't say who it is because it's not helpful, but a well thought of Christian leader has stepped out of leading a very large church to look at there's lots of people doing this. It's not just Anne. It's like, 10, 11 conversations of people doing stuff. And they're interestingly, none are competing. They're all for each other. But one of these is a significant leader stepped out of a very large church because he'd worked out it was £17,000 per baptism. Now that's challenging.
Yeah.
So I think for all of us, we seize this missional moment. And I think within that, the small, you can't have passengers either. It's not a small group. It's not a small group. It's not a bunch of Christians just sitting around chatting about a Bible passage. It's an intentional missional church. And it's how the church started. And if you look around the world, in China, Iran and places, it's how the church has exploded. However, here, I'm with you. I love the mega church. Goodness me. I'm going to preach in a church in something that's very big. I can't wait. Absolutely can't wait. If I'm talking about what I would humanly choose, it is not this.
Yeah.
But this is the mandate on my wife's life at the moment.
Yeah.
And I am a very supportive husband.
But I think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating because of what I said before, this great buffet table. I think, what would your take be, maybe wrapping up this bit of it, I'm aware of time, but what would your take be on Iran and China? The driving forces there is persecution. And fortunate, we don't live under persecution. We don't have that dynamic as much as them. And I know some listening might say we have some sort of persecution, but we're not fearing for our lives because we're meeting indoors and talking about Jesus. So do you need that dynamic in the mix for this to work and that kind of thing?
No, you don't. You don't. You need urgency. That's what you need. Because if you're not urgent, it does become a cozy club. That's the same across the church. Where has the urgency gone? Yeah, and I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. Where's the urgency gone? So pressure is interesting, right? The UK church is increasingly under pressure, particularly the bit I'm involved in, because if you make a stand on certain things, it's going to be interesting. I think the next 10 years are going to be the trickiest we've had for a long time. And there's a bit of a wheat and chaff moment as well. So we don't need persecution, but pressure forces it. I'm not sure quite where we're going in this country in terms of the level of pressure. I certainly know we'll be able to tell because I'll be the first one sent to prison if we go that way. So I'll let you know. Come and visit me in Belmarsh. But, there is a greater pressure coming. But I think it's urgency. How urgent are you to reach people? So at what point, we've all heard those church planting things, at what point do you get passengers in the church? At what point, what numbers, what? And you know what? I don't think any of us are trying to create a model and then say, let's McDonaldize this out. I think we're all just saying, how do we make the most of this moment for the gospel? And for too long, I think at least, we went to church for an hour and a half. We hardly spoke to anyone. This was my experience. You hardly speak to anyone. You then leave, and that's it for the week. It's like your horse riding class on a Tuesday and football on a Thursday and church on a Sunday. No. This should be everything. And I think we need to rediscover some of that.
It's fascinating. I think credit to Anne and yourself for stepping out and doing it. It's a thrill. I'm talking to various people who are on with different things as well and working out. I think this is where we're going. I've got a friend who's planting in a new city in the UK. Him and his wife have just moved to it. They're looking at how do we do it a lot more missional, or how do we do it where, we're not having to maybe go down such a traditional route of it. And they're all great leaders like yourselves. And not that previously hasn't been done, but this type of style has previously been a bit freakish, a bit weird. Yeah. It's had an unusual twist to it. It's had just some disgruntled groups who cannot fit in the traditional setup because for various reasons. And so it's kind of like being shelved over there. But I'm really grateful that I'm grateful that you've done it, and how amazing is Anne to be able to write a book and then step out and go, I'll do it as well as write it is incredible. So,
well, that's the generational piece, isn't it? We talked about generations earlier, but one of the things in our generation is don't say something you can't then live.
Right.
And wrote a book, and then you're like, hang on, I've got to live it.
Right.
And that's really, really challenging.
Yeah.
I think also the Lord's just up to some new adventures.
Yeah.
And going forwards, we haven't lost people, younger generations and people, because we haven't entertained them enough. We've challenged them enough. And this Christianity, we need to set the bar higher for some people. And one thing the small definitely does is it sets the bar higher. Because you can't just sit there and be unnoticed.
Yeah.
You can't turn up and then be asked if it's your first week because everyone knows you before others. It's just different. It's just different. Not better. Different.
Yeah. And that's what I like. I love the fact, you like you say, speaking this week at a large church, but that buffet table, I'm so glad you brought that. And I think long may it continue. Mega church, micro church, middle of the road church, like all of it rising to a whole new level is the passion for sure. For wrapping up, last question or two, what, you touched upon, you've come from this kind of family of vicars and church leaders. I've had the privilege of speaking to your dad and mum. I had an hour with them a couple of weeks ago. What would be your kind of take on raising a family in ministry? Because I presume you were raised a different way to how you're raising your kids. But I know that many people listening to this are raising family and doing ministry together. What would your take be on that?
You don't get away with anything, that's for sure. There has to be an authenticity and integrity to what you're doing. I think the challenging thing is Jesus is the most important thing in my life. But my ministry and Jesus are not synonymous with one another. And so I think a real challenge to us is to not mix those up. The negative, if I had any as growing up in a Christian family, was Jesus got blamed for quite a lot, but actually that was ministry. And that's an interesting space. So I'm trying to not make the same mistakes that were made in me, but make my own. So my children can go on and make their own, not mine. But I do think that it's good for your kids to catch you reading the Bible. It's good for your kids to see you doing what you do in the home is the same as what you're saying out there. It's good for your kids to be involved. Yeah. We do not lots, but we do spiritual disciplines with our kids. If we're ever doing fasting, whether that's Lent or something else, we get them to do it too, or encourage them to do it too. We do times of prayer around the dinner table where we'll pray, but then we'll be quiet for a few minutes because prayer is not a monologue, it's a conversation. Does God want to say anything? So we've raised our kids to understand the prophetic, how to minister in that. But we've also shared our disappointments with them. One of the things we decided when they got above about 8 or 9 was we weren't going to pretend life was perfect if it wasn't. I had some real challenges in my job. My job at EA is amazing, but it's really difficult. And we're not going to hide that from them. So we take them on the journey, warts and all. But in the end, we want to show them that our love for Jesus is greater than everything else. They know who we are. You can't pretend with the kids. But you have to be authentic. You keep going deeper yourself. If you're not going deeper, because the thing we say to our kids as well, God does not have grandchildren.
Wow.
So my status before God is the same as my sons or my daughters.
Yeah.
Therefore, I need to be going deeper too.
Yeah.
And the beauty of this new model of church where we get to empower them a bit to actually do stuff, which is fun.
That sounds so exciting. And just remind me, how old are your kids? Just so people listening know.
Yeah. 14 and 11. So apparently this is when it all starts getting bad. But me and Anna youth work, so this is what we've been looking forward to.
Yeah. You've been training for this for years. Get your white pumps out and the whistle around your neck, and you're going to be fine.
Something like that.
Last question, because I've loved chatting to you, and I'm so glad that you've unpacked about what you're doing with church. But kind of, what is the future of the church you see? Kind of wrapping some of your thoughts up. But this buffet table's been a great analogy. But what in Europe? We have covered a lot actually, Gavin. Thinking about it, you've talked about how the fact the next 10 years are going to be. You've given us the doom and gloom. You've given us the buffet table. Wrap it all together in a kind of Jerry Springer end of the podcast way.
You make stuff there.
I have.
I think it depends on how we play the next 18 months. I really do. And I'll tell you why.
Go on.
I wrote forward to a book by a guy called Jeremy Thomas, who is the theologian in residence at All Souls Land Place. So he's got some of John Stott's old job. Now, he's doing 50 years at a time, evangelical church history in the UK. The one he asked me to write it forward to was 1900 to 1950. The book was complicated, right? I had Google Thesaurus out half the time.
Okay.
But one bit really struck me as incredibly powerful. At the end of the Second World War in this country, church attendance went off the chart. Like for 18 months, massive growth. Then after 18 months, it went down to pre-Second World War levels and below. The diagnosis in the book was this: the world was looking to the church for hope and for answers after a war. But the church took 18 months getting itself back to normal and comfortable. And by the time the church had sorted itself out, the world had lost interest. Now, we now have the greatest moment since then. I mean, when else in your lifetime, Rich, has there been on the news excess deaths in the UK? You know, it's every night, this many excess deaths, this much, living in the light and shadow of death, mortality salience, aware of our brokenness. People are looking. They won't be filling your churches, but they may be in the digital space, over garden fences, perhaps in micro churches, in different spaces where we get close to people on the ground. People are desperately looking for hope. So I think we have an open goal for 18 months. But my fear is that, like in the history we've done, we will spend time trying to get back to Egypt, which you can't do, or back to normal, get ourselves sorted, and then say, where is everyone? We have the greatest missional opportunity of my lifetime, but it's right now. And so what I would say is the future of the church will be very different depending on whether we seize that moment or don't seize that moment. Because the experience we've been through, as people keep saying, we've all been through the same storm, not the same boat. Those of us that have Jesus now have an opportunity to show what is it like to have lived through this, but stood on the rock of ages. So what I'd say to the church is outwards, not inwards. By all means, look after those inside, but outwards, not inwards. And let's make sure we make the most of this moment. Because the world is, the world is asking questions that we've been asking for 30 years and they weren't asking them. I know you wanted to wrap up, but a couple of examples for me. One,
keep going.
Yeah, one, my barber, right? I live in northwest London, so I pay far too much for my haircut. And it's not a good job and it's not hard. So my view has been, I've gone to the same one for 5 years. My view has been, if I have to pay that much, you can even talk about Jesus. So every time I've gone in, I've had a right go. I know I've got absolutely nowhere. Then about 6 months ago, I went in for my haircut. He said, this week says, wow, I'm so pleased to see you. I've never wanted to talk about God so much. We talked about Jesus the whole time. I gave him a link to an online alpha. Another example, I was at one of my predecessors, Joel Edwards. It was his celebration of his life about 3 weeks ago. And I was out there. This big lad comes up to me. He's about 25, really athletic, really muscular. It's like looking in the mirror. And he comes up to me and he says, why have you and your wife stopped your program on TVN? We used to have a program on TVN, stopped about 2.5 years ago. Why have you stopped it? My mum loved it. Why have you stopped it? What's going on with you? I was like, we stopped it because we needed to, blah, blah, blah. She says, yeah, but my mum loves it. Why aren't you going to start it again? So I'm really sorry. Just tell your mum I'm sorry. I said, okay. Then he says, and by the way, I got so bored during lockdown that I watched 4 of them with my mum on demand. And I gave my life to Jesus at the end. I thought you might want to know. Now, here's the thing. Those programs weren't very evangelistic. They probably weren't very good.
Yeah.
But there's something about right now where you have to do less to have the conversation. You'll see this when you go to shops or communities. You have to do less to talk about Jesus. And especially this Christmas season. I mean, the clue's in the name. We can talk about Christ. And what I'd say is people are desperate. People are desperate. They're weary. They're tired. There's a deficit of hope. Hope is the name. His name is Jesus. And we must make the most of this moment because this is a defining moment. We have prayed and prayed and prayed for a moment in the UK. We now have an open goal for there to possibly be one.
Come on. Oh, we started with football. We finished with football. I love the analogy, Gavin. No, I'm so glad that you've given examples and put it there. And thank you so much, Gavin, for giving your time and all that you do. Actually, I was on listening to the radio the other day, and one of you guys was on one of the debates on there, representing you guys, and did a great job. And I was proud to listen to it. And he was really well thought through and well spoken about. And so thanks for all that you do and sharing your heart today.
God bless you. Thanks for having me. And if you're not a member of EA and you're listening, you should be. Check us out.
Well, do you get more passionate than Gavin? And I love his openness, his honesty, his unwavering faith. And I really hope that helped you. I think it wasn't really planned us talking about microchurch, but I was just fascinated for myself just to see, he's actually doing it as someone who could run a sizable church and could have all the infrastructure with it, has decided with his family to deep dive into micro church there. So that was really fascinating. Look, getting great feedback, which is really encouraging. I'm an encourager, but you need to know something about encouragers. Encouragers love encouragement. And so if you could send me anything or give me a Rich, this was really helpful on any front. It's so good just for me to know, is it hitting the mark or is it helping people? So just either DM me or send something my way on email or whatever else it might be. But you can get me on Instagram or through my website, richmartin.co.uk. It's so good that you're with us, and I'm really enjoying doing this. Is what is essentially a little bit of a side hustle. I love doing a little bit of a side hustle. So enjoy, have the great rest of your week.